I want to share a few things that have happened to me since moving to the land down under. I moved to Australia in 2018, built a home with my partner in far north Queensland. The area where we built is part of the Daintree rainforest. We are surrounded by rainforest and the coral sea is about 50 meters through the dense brush. Things were relatively quiet until about 5 weeks ago. Now we are seeing min-min lights or spook lights, little balls of light that are far too big and bright to be glow bugs moving through the trees and about the property. Booms and bangs against the outside wall of our newly built home. We grab a torch, flashlight, and go out to see what's going on. The noise is so loud. If it had been a bird or bat, that poor thing would have broken its neck or at least stunned itself. The property is fenced in, gated, and locked. No rocks or clods of dirt on concrete. Nothing on the side of our house, as if kids were pulling a prank. It literally sounds like hands banging on the walls. We get up to go see and then come back in, get back in bed, and it happens again. Like it's toying with us, being mischievous. The locals and aboriginals have told me about Yowie, which is similar to the US Bigfoot, Bunyip, and other Dreamtime creatures that reside and make the Daintree their home. It is one of the oldest rainforests on the planet. We are surrounded by the beauty of nature, and now it's like every night is a new adventure. We don't know what might happen next. Nothing happens inside the home, just on the property. I have done research online and at the local library. I can't find anything other than the occasional Yowie sighting. I've gotten in touch with a few ghost hunting teams and asked my questions. I'm waiting for a response to see if they may know of anything. My partner's sister said we may have built our home on a gravesite, but I doubt this. Not everything is built on a gravesite. It may just be the land itself. I know the Daintree is very special to the Aboriginals. It's sacred. Why is it when things like this happen, I never have my cell phone on hand? It's like one is so caught up in the moment that all you can do is experience it. But from now on, I'm going to try to capture something on film. This story actually has a YouTube link that's associated with it that I will include down in the description. It's a video that the podcast owners that she interviewed with actually did. Apparently they found proof, or I guess they found the evidence during their recording session that something was mimicking this person. It'll make more sense after I read the story, so I'm going to read the story now. So, earlier I had done a podcast where I talked openly about an experience I had as a little girl. It was about my previous post, Shadow in the Water, and while we were talking, my boyfriend, who has a lot of experiences with me, became excited and wanted to share some of his own. But he decided not to because he wanted to be respectful to the podcast crew on the line. After I told my boyfriend it's okay, you can talk, he shook his head and then a disembodied voice said, "Hello," in the room where the podcast crew were located. I actually heard it through my phone. I thought it was the crew who said hello or one of their friends who I remember was going to stop by and give them some drinks from the gas station. I paused and then said anyway and continued the story, and I remembered thinking it was odd. It just didn't sound right, because I heard it very clearly. As I was watching the video of the podcast, I remember feeling a bit of shock when I heard the hello and none of the crew's mouths moved. So this meant they didn't say anything when I heard the hello through my phone. This isn't really too weird or odd for me, because typically this happens whenever I talk with my voice about my past experiences. I thought it had been a long enough period of time where maybe it wouldn't happen again. For a bit of short backstory on that, in middle school and high school, I had the nickname Ghost Girl. It was something the bullies used to call me, because whenever I talked about something that happened which was paranormal, the person would become hunted by voices or knocking or doors slamming or even a shadow man in a hat. Usually it would only happen if the person got scared of the story. For some reason, they were seen as disrespectful. I also used to take a path through the school forest to get home because the bullies had been too scared to go in there. After one of the bullies had something scary happen to them in there, the nickname was used even more throughout the class. Anyway, shortly after the podcast was done, I felt a draft in the room and realized that my boyfriend opened the window before the podcast started. This is bad. That is something you don't do, and it was especially bad because it was the middle of the night. I talked to him about keeping the windows closed in the future, but he is still very scared because of what he had to deal with in the past. We had a bad experience, and because of that, we always move the moment something starts up again. That night, I went to sleep and had a vivid nightmare, sort of. In my dream, my house was dark without any lights on. It was the middle of the night. My bedroom door was open and I could see moonlight reflecting off the tile floor down the hall where my front door would be. It was cold, and I had taken my blankets off and walked past my open bedroom door down the hall to the front, which was apparently open as well. I planned on just closing the door and turning the heat up and going back to bed. When I turned to the front door, a teenage girl in a torn, long, gray, dirty nightshirt stood still outside of it. Her hair was long, messy, and brown, and her skin was very pale but covered in dirt. Behind her, half of the lawn was covered in snow while the other half had no snow at all. The moonlight had a dim blue light reflecting a dim sparkle of the fresh white snow. She stood there and looked at me in silence. Then she whispered, "He was watching you." Before I could ask who, something that I couldn't see grabbed my back and forcefully dragged me backwards down the hallway in the direction of my bedroom. It happened in under a second. I went from the front door and was soon thrown into what looked like my own sleeping body. And then I woke up. I shrugged it off as a simple dream. I don't like to let weird things like that get to me. As time passed, I started to notice some weird things going on in the house. My boyfriend and I were lying on the bed, and I played him a video from the podcast about the voice. When it was done playing, we laid there for a bit and browsed the web and read it. A bag from across the bedroom tipped over off of a small storage box. My boyfriend was spooked, but I told him not to worry about it. Then a few moments later, something else dropped off the table, which was beside the storage box. We didn't talk about it, and I just went over and picked them up. They didn't drop again. A few days passed, and I had just woken up. It was sunny, and I was just listening to music on my bed. My boyfriend sent me a text message that he went to visit one of our friends. He is super social, and the quarantine is hard on him. As I listened to music, I felt a pocket of hot air hanging by the cheek of my face. I raised my hand to my ear, and the air was hot but faded. I shrugged it off as well, with the explanation that it must have been hot air from my head since I just woke up and my head had been on a pillow just 15 minutes ago. Then I looked up from my phone, and there was a man's pale face about 3 feet away. It came as soon as it left. The door opened and my boyfriend came into the room. He smiled and asked me about my day and handed me an iced coffee that he bought for me on his way back. He climbed into bed and was getting ready to watch some TV. He went still for a second. He felt the bed, patting the bed right next to me. "Why is the bed so hot here?" He kept patting it. I had no idea how to explain it. I thought he must have just left the house, but he said he left a little while ago. I felt the bed next to him, and it was hot, like someone was just lying there next to me. He shrugged it off and asked me how my coffee was. It was weird, but it wasn't, creepy. As time went on, I would be in the bedroom and there would just be, weird shadow orb things that would flicker around at times. It wasn't bugs or flies. We don't have any bugs, and the room is always clean. But I kept shrugging it off as just, nothing. My dog started to look at a certain spot in the room, at the foot of my bed. She would just stare at it. Even when she jumped off the bed to eat her food, she just kept looking at that spot. Sometimes when she was lying next to me, her head would move like she was watching somebody walk by. Also during the podcast, she kept barking loudly, but she doesn't really bark. I figured she was just barking at me because I was on the phone, which she just doesn't do. The next night, I was preparing to talk about another experience with the podcast crew. I was a bit nervous because this story was a lot more scary and complex. I had gotten up and walked over to my bedroom door and opened it. Right in the hallway, there was a shadow there. He was tall and had a hat on and a long coat, just like the one I saw in the story I was going to tell them. I tried to let my eyes adjust because it was dim in my bedroom, but the rest of the house was dark. I realized as my eyes adjusted, even though the rest of the house was dark, the hallway in the living room was lighter than what the Shadow Man was. The back door, which was a little bit across from the front door, was, for some reason, wide open. And the moonlight was shining on the wall and the sofa behind him. The Shadow Man dispersed like a cloud a little bit later. I messaged the podcast crew to see if they had anything weird happen. One of them said it was just weird tapping sounds, and that was about it. Later on, I was in my bedroom and I fell asleep. A man showed up in the dream and told me not to tell them the story. He looked like the face of the man I had seen earlier. He said that something was looking for me and I had a bounty on my head? That something was looking for me, and if I told it, they would go after the crew in order to try and find me? That they would do more to them than just knocking and tapping in voices? I don't kid around with this stuff if it involves other people. I don't just shrug it off. When I woke up, I messaged the crew and said I couldn't go through with the podcast this time. They were super understanding about it, but I didn't tell them about what happened or why. I just didn't want anything to happen to them or my boyfriend because of sharing it openly. It wasn't worth it. Anyways, that's the most recent story. Probably one of the strangest. Thanks for reading. Whether the hello was from the Shadow Man in the hat and coat, which is eerie similar to what I heard before, or if it was the mimic, I don't know. But what I heard through the phone, it sounded much more like a man saying hello. But in the video, it sounded very different from the voice I heard over the phone. Feel free to share your thoughts. I know this is strange, and it was strange for me too. All activities stopped after I told the podcast I couldn't do the second interview. Basically, I'm a skeptic of convenience. I'm interested in everything paranormal, but I'm just not convinced by it. However, I do really want to be. This leads me to me and my friend, who is a strong believer, to take me to some woods near his house he claims is haunted by the spirit of a man who killed himself in said woods. Now, the story of the guy is true. He did indeed kill himself in the woods, but are the woods haunted? I'm unsure. So me and him have been doing some low-key investigation of it. Now, we've seen some creepy stuff, heard some creepy stuff, nothing that couldn't be explained away by something rational. So we got a little brave and decided to go into this field connecting to the forest at night. It was around 11, and me and my friend were simply walking across the field when I noticed there was a dark, humanoid silhouette slowly walking towards the forest. I turned to get my friend's attention, and then turned back to notice that he wasn't walking anymore. He was full-on sprinting toward the forest, away from us, and we simply watched them disappear into the forest. There's nothing on the other side of those woods for a good few miles, and so someone is running through the woods in the middle of night, it isn't exactly feasible. It's by far the most paranormal thing we've encountered near that forest, and we have never encountered anything similar to that again. So that's my story. I hope you believe me, because only me and my friend know what we saw, and everyone else just brushes it off. To start, sorry for the long post. I was inspired to write down my experiences after reading a similar story. When I was 18 or 19, I worked nights at a beautiful old care home, just outside of the town that I lived in. The home itself was situated high up on a hill, and was very isolated. Nothing but fields and hills around it. I think it was maybe a few 100 years old, built on 3 levels and 2 specialized wards for residents with severe dementia. It was my first job, outside of a little Saturday stint working as a cashier. I was very sensitive and shy, And from the first moment I walked in there, I felt overwhelmed. There was a lot of sadness in that place, as well as this feeling of deep calm. I can't describe it well, but sometimes the atmosphere felt so thick and so heavy, it was like walking through soup. I worked nights with a small team of people. It was our job to make sure that everyone got to bed and was safe and clean and comfy. We would also keep an ear out for anyone ringing bells or buzzers in the night. On the walk was an intercom system. The number of the rooms who had rung would flash up. Of course, during my time there, we did have a few people that passed away. One, as I was cleaning her room, which really shook me up. However, one of the strangest things happened after a little old lady passed away in a downstairs room. On the night I worked, the room was empty, as it was being prepped for someone new to move in. We had finished our rounds, and were all in the large common room when the intercom flashed up with the room number of the lady who had passed. We were a little confused, but wondered if another resident had wandered in there and maybe pressed the button. Upon checking, the room was empty, and all the residents on that ward were seemingly asleep in their beds. The buzzer for that room rang maybe 4 times that night, and apparently the next night too. I wasn't on that shift. One of the ladies I worked with had a real dislike of the downstairs area. You had to walk through this really cool glass atrium-style passage to get to the lower area of the building, which was where all the residents with severe dementia lived. The doors to the atrium were locked for safety, and there were usually 2 members of staff situated down there at all times. This particular lady hated being put on shift down there. She told me she would often hear doors opening and shutting when everyone else was asleep, and once had felt a hand on her shoulder when no one had been sat with her. The home cat, who was a lovely, gentle little thing, would hiss, spit, and claw if someone tried to take him near that ward. Personally, I also hated being down there, as it felt very dark and oppressive. Maybe just as it was a basement. The last thing is less paranormal and just a bit creepy. There was a lady in room 45. I remember as I used to dread seeing that number flash up. She would always ask for me if I was on shift, unfortunately. She was a very large lady with limited mobility, so often needed help with moving to use the loo, which is when she would call for me. Her room was filled, and I mean filled from wall to floor, with dolls. They even covered her bed, so that when she slept, they were over her like a blanket. When I went up to help her, she would grip my arm, look me straight in the eyes, and tell me about her husband who was in the room, and who was getting her pregnant and raping her. For a young, naive 18-year-old girl, this really used to scare me. I would help her into bed afterwards, and she would often try to get me to stay to change the baby or talk about the people that lived in her room. It was all due to the dementia, and I knew that, but damn, I hated being in there at 3 a.m. Okay, so if you haven't seen my last post on here, named The Man Under the Streetlight, then you should read it. It's just as creepy as these experiences. Also, this post will be in list format. 1. This is the first paranormal experience I ever had. So, I'm in my room, and I think I was like 4 years old then. My mom was reading me a bedtime story, and I look over to the wall, and it looks like there's a shadow made of light looking at me. Almost right when I looked at it, it ran away. 2. I was in the bathroom. My bathroom is right next to my mom and dad's bedroom, and I looked over, and it looks like a floating javelin racing to the door. 3. After the last one, I didn't have anything for like 3 years until when we went on an overnight field trip for the school. And of course, the room was haunted. Before I get more of the story done, I have to give you at least the layout of the room. So, the room is split into 4 parts. The bathroom, the main area, and the 2 bedrooms. I was in what I'll call room 1, and there were also 6 people there including me, and 1 other guy in room 1. So after we got done with getting set up in the room, we went to our activities, and after we had to go to bed, at night we both woke up at like 3:47. The other guy could barely breathe, and I couldn't get up. At first I didn't see anything. The other guy could see it right away. Also, since he couldn't barely breathe, he didn't scream. But then I saw it. It looked like a body with no head and a missing right arm made of brown fog sitting on his chest. And just as fast as it appeared, it disappeared. 4. Okay, so this is the most tame and short ones, so I'm counting them all as 1. So one day I had all my toys in a toy dump truck. I left my room, and when I came back, the toys were spilled. So one time I was in the living room, and I heard a box of toys and pencils fall and hit the ground. This one happened twice. This event happened to me when I was around 8 to 10 years old in the garden of the house that I used to live in. I'm telling this story as I remember it without fabricating anything whatsoever. One day, I was playing in my garden. I liked to play with the ball I had or look through the chain link fence which separated our family's property from a river. Now, to explain the situation which occurred, I need to explain the shed we had in the garden. Now, this shed was placed directly at the back of the garden, in the middle of the chain link fence. This meant I could enter the shed from the front, go to the right side of the shed or the left, but not the back as it was placed in front of the fence. Another important note is that the right wall of the shed had a window that would grant you vision of the inside of the entire shed. One of the things I really enjoyed doing was walking over to the right side of the shed and knocking on the window 3 times, ducking down, then getting up and looking directly at the window. I remember doing this because it was fun for little me. Of course, nothing would ever show itself, and I only did this as a way to roleplay. This day was very different. Although parts of my memory are hazy, I remember the main event with perfect detail. I was watching the river through the fence when I walked to the right side of the shed. I knocked on the window 3 times and ducked down. When I jumped back up and looked through the window, a pale, white, humanoid thing sprouted up and looked at me. I remember it looked me in the eyes, and then it opened its mouth and started moving. It wasn't moving in a way as if it was talking, but it was just moving its lower jaw really fast. It's hard to describe. It was just moving its mouth really quick, and I felt maliciousness coming from this creature. After that, it just ducked back down as quickly as it had come. The situation must have been around 5 seconds long, and I remember just staring at the window dumbfounded, completely shocked at what I saw. Even though remembering this situation now makes me feel really creeped out and scared, 8 to 10-year-old me was more curious and perplexed than scared. So I did what any curious child would have done, and I entered the shed. After all, there was only one way in and out, which was the front door. The only window of the shed could not be opened anyway, so that thing should have been inside. When I walked into the shed, I saw nothing. The shed itself is really small, so there would have been nowhere to hide. I just remember being confused more than anything. So I closed the door and continued playing outside. Looking back at the situation as an adult, I would have absolutely ran away, as the thing was only human-shaped, but definitely not from our world. Also, I get scared easily as well. This situation only happened once to me, and never again, even though I played the window-knocking ritual dozens of times after the event occurred. I wouldn't be surprised if it was an overactive imagination, and I'm definitely open to that idea. The only problem was that the creature felt so real, and I can't imagine young me conjuring such a creepy thing from my mind. I also thought that Maybe it was my reflection being slightly distorted as it rose up at a similar time I did. Only problem with that theory is that the creature ducked down while I was still standing up. If you guys have any theories, suggestions, ideas, or just some questions, then feel free to let me know what you think. Thanks for listening to my story. Over a decade ago, my father bought a piece of land in Palawan, Philippines. It was right next to a black beach. The sand was black. And if you went into the ocean, under the waves, a couple of feet in, was a graveyard that the ocean had taken over. It was eerie, but beautiful. Our land had its own apparition and ghost called the Lady in White. She was a young woman, perhaps in her early to mid-20s, who wore a long white dress, and she would be seen drifting along the land, ocean, or beach. She was seen by countless people, by our family members, random people passing by, the priests, the nuns, kids playing nearby, basically anyone who came by the land at sundown. She was so real at times that people would often mistake her when she was on the beach, far enough away from the road, to be either my grandmother or aunt or myself. My grandmother was murdered on the beach in 2010, and we sold the land to a priest on the island. But I've heard that the Lady in White still roams the land. I just wonder what she wants and who she is. Once again, here's another story that was told to me by my ex-husband. And if memories serve me correctly, it happened to his ex-stepmother's stepfather, who I'll call Tom. Try wrapping your brain around that. Anyway, here's the story. Years ago, Tom was working at a job, I can't remember where he would oftentimes work late, so it wasn't unusual for him to be driving home late at night. As you know, highways are littered with mile markers, and Louisiana was no exception. One night, while driving home, he noticed a lady wearing a white dress standing near mile marker 5. I can't remember the exact number, and although he felt bad for the lady, he didn't stop. She was beautiful, with her long, flowing hair, and dress that she was wearing which reminded him of one of those dresses from the 1800s. He continued to drive and noticed that each time he passed a new mile marker, he would see the Lady in White standing there. Naturally, this creeped him out, so he stepped on the gas, not once slowing down, so I guess you could say that he put the pedal to the metal. But anyway, just before approaching the next mile marker, though he looked into his rear view mirror and got the shock of his life, because sitting in the back seat was none other than the Lady in White, this time with a malicious look on her face that quickly distorted into something hideous. As he was fastly approaching mile marker 8, he began to hear this evil laughter that echoed throughout his car, but tried to ignore it because he was so scared, and kept driving. Apparently, she began to wail like a banshee because he was getting away. Eventually, she vanished from his car, but what was to follow was even scarier. He then saw movement off to his right, and what he saw he would never forget. It was the same Lady in White chasing him, but this time, just her disembodied head that was cackling like a witch. The head also seemed to be getting bigger and at times would make its appearance inside his car to scare him even more. Her head began to weave in and out of Tom's car, all the while continuing to pursue him. Or, I should say, her head continued to pursue him, keeping the same pace as the car. That was until finally they reached mile marker 9, and then she vanished. Needless to say, he didn't hang around long and made it home in record time. And in case you're wondering, Tom continued to take that same highway for 20 or so more years until he retired, but never experienced the Lady in White again. Anyway, for some reason when I think about the story, it reminds me of those short stories in Creepshow 2 about the hitchhiker, and I always feel compelled to say to myself, Thanks for the ride, lady. So when I was 8, I had an encounter with a black-eyed kid. At the time, me and my family lived in Campo Grande, MS, Brazil. We lived in a deserted place with no neighbors, only a few trees around. The house was fully surrounded by walls. No way to enter without being let in. Besides that, we had cameras and a dog, so there's literally no way to not know someone was in the house. At night, I was watching TV in my parents' bedroom because I couldn't sleep. My sister and brother were in their respective rooms. I get thirsty, so I left my parents' bed and went to the kitchen. No lights on because I had no fear until then. So in the way to the kitchen, there's a corridor that leads to all the bedrooms, the TV room, and then the kitchen. When I was going through the TV room, I hear a knocking on the glass. So I turn to my right, and I see in the reflection of our glass cabinet a girl with pitch black eyes, a white dress, and 2 ponytails behind me in the TV room. I instantly run back to my parents' bedroom and told my parents. They rushed to see if they could find someone, but they couldn't. Me and my parents couldn't sleep through the night, and my brother and sister that were already sleeping had nightmares. Since my parents are really Catholic, the next day they called a priest to bless the house. I never saw the girl again, but I never left my bedroom at night too. At the time, I didn't know about the black-eyed kid's legend until only years later. I told one of my friends what I saw because we were talking about strange experiences, and he told me about the black-eyed kids. The strange part is, that spirit was never let in. How was she inside? There was no way someone normal could even sneak past the walls, and even the house. We don't live in the same house anymore, and not even in the same state, but the glass cabinet is still with us. So this story happened about 1.5 years ago now, and I had more experiences since. I was walking out on the street at like 8 p.m., and it had just turned dark outside. So I'd just gotten back to my house, and then everything went dark. I couldn't see anything. Then I could see again, and I was up the street where I was about 30 seconds ago. Only one streetlight was on, and under it was a man standing there. No features visible, but they were wearing a dark shirt, shorts, and a baseball hat. I was terrified, but I gathered all of my courage and walked toward them. Yes, I know I would be the first person to die in a horror movie, but now at this point I was like 3 feet away from them. I said in a quiet, cracking voice, "Hello?" No answer. "Hello? Who are you?" I took my phone out of my pocket. I put the flashlight on. I pointed it at him. The man had a flat face. By this I mean like his eyes, nose, and mouth were completely flat. Like he still had cheekbones, and it looked kind of like it was painted on. I dropped my phone and ran, and then everything went dark again. I was back at my front door, but my phone wasn't in my pocket. I looked around, and I see my phone on the ground in the street, flashlight shining into the air. I went and grabbed it, and ran into my house, and I haven't been walking outside past 5 in almost 1.5 years now. Half a year ago, it came back, and it walked up to the window by my door and disappeared into thin air. Now, about a week ago, it came back. It stared at me while I was inside, and then it disappeared again. Has anyone experienced anything like this? I'm only asking this because I'm still confused about this. If it were an art show, it had surpassed any postmodern installation exhibit I have ever seen, in that it actually succeeded in being odd without trying to be. There were neon lights coming up through the floor that turned into a glowing gelatinous substance once they reached about 4 feet above the ground. On the walls, there were unnaturally brightly colored pictures made out of the same unusual material that constantly changed like a video, only these were not videos. Most of the time, these pictures looked as though they were made of light, but sometimes this light took the form of other materials, such as what I interpreted to be liquefied plexiglass. Patterns would lay over themselves, creating unusual colors and continuing to shift. Most of this artwork was not beautiful at all. The patterns were busy and plaid-like when in straight lines and right angles, and I only saw glimpses of aesthetically pleasing colors before they were interrupted by louder ones. The pictures and lights were so abrasive that I could only look at them so long before feeling dizzy and disoriented. When the patterns were not angular, they resembled wavy, cylindrical tubes in all sorts of colors, mainly orange and pink. The intrusive quality of the exhibit made me feel as though I were on another planet, with a drastically different chemical makeup from Earth. And I was physically unwell in such an environment. Much of the work on display would actually project outward from the walls into the viewer's face. So much was going on that the only thing lacking was subtlety. After some time, I found myself wandering back and forth between a street fair, which contained booths run by artistic scientists, whose endeavor was to demonstrate how to use the gelatinous neon material, and inside of a house with dark wooden floors. I noticed that many of the booths outside were designed for young children. The demonstrations held for adults were clearly unsafe, and they brought to my attention that the odd substance these people were working with was toxic. I asked one of the scientists in charge of the booth if the material was used for the children were the same, and unfortunately they were. My uneasiness grew as I perused the fair. I enjoyed the calm atmosphere within the house, but couldn't ignore my festering anxiety. The room I was standing in was on the ground floor. Just ahead of me was a screen door which led to the backyard. To my immediate left was a stairway that led to the basement, and beside it, also to my left, was a hallway leading back to a room lit by a faint orange incandescent light. The time of day was dusk. Tiny vibrations pulsated beneath my feet, accompanied by a quick succession of sharp clanking sounds, and I saw, coming from the faintly lit hallway, a group of insects made of a beautiful, silvery metallic material. These ants and scorpions were not shiny, but opalescent, and measured about 10 inches long. They walked toward my general direction, seemingly oblivious of my presence. I was surprised at myself for not being put off or startled by them. In fact, I went to get a closer look, not only to study them in detail and enjoy their beauty, but also determine whether they were sentient beings or mobile sculptures. The ants definitely had wills of their own. They could accelerate quickly, which made me nervous, and seemed to be looking for something. The scorpions were similar, but seemed more aimless. Their tails' movements were like those of fish. That is, if fish had metallic spears at the end of theirs. The legs of each of these insects tapered into a needle's width of a point, and upon realizing the sharpness of their limbs, I began to dislike the rapid tapping sounds they made as they scurried across the hardwood floors. I then discovered that the ants appeared to have far more than 6 legs, which made me wonder what they were. The beauty of these creatures, however, deterred me from walking away from them despite their dangerous appearance. I wanted very much to know what they were made out of and to study them closely. As I was observing the surface of one of the ant-like beings, whose head was an almost perfect sphere, I noticed me for the first time. At first glance, the head and body had a matte surface, but after a closer inspection, the surface looked like mother of pearl covered in oil slicker, encased by the skin of a soap bubble. The swirling, iridescent colors were constantly moving in layers. The creature lifted its head toward my face. Its tiny black eyes were so dark that there was no way to tell exactly where they were focusing. It stepped back as if preparing to lunge at me, and sure enough it did. It swiped at my shin using one of its numerous front legs, which produced the sound of knives sharpening as it brushed against its other legs. The metal against metal noises increased as the other creatures gathered around me in formation. I ran through the screen door, eventually winding up at the street fair once more. I returned to the scientific art fair booths and came across a man in his late 20s, with a crowd gathering around him. He wore a beat-up, old-fashioned brown top hat and a monocle, and performed magic tricks with a ubiquitous neon substance. He would juggle with it, make it disappear in his hands, cause it to somehow pass through his body, etc. All the children oohed and awed, bringing more attention to the show as the crowds passed by. Concerned for the safety of the public, I waited for the crowd to dissipate. When the man started packing up his equipment, I approached him to inquire if the neon substance was in fact toxic, as I had been told that it was earlier by someone in the crowd. He looked at me as though I was an imbecile and laughed. "Why should you waste your time worrying about safety? Such things don't even exist," he sneered imposingly. "Don't you have any idea how many toxic things we all come into contact with on a daily basis without even knowing it? You need to worry less and enjoy yourself more." As the eye behind his monocle drifted slowly off to the lateral side of his head, he grinned as if to tell me how amusing it was for him to have the rare opportunity to talk to someone as naive as I was. I could see that he derived sadistic pleasure from making me feel helpless. Although I was faint with fear, ready to collapse, I also wanted very much to slap him. My aggressive, self-preserving instincts took over, and I found the strength to demand as to the whereabouts of a competent doctor. I had come in contact with the substance during the art show and was not feeling well. Nevertheless, the man continued mercilessly. "So you want to take the blue pill, do you? I apologize for referring to the Matrix, but the analogy works too well," he sneered. "I want to know what I came in direct contact with, and I want to know how to detox from whatever it is if need be. I can see that you don't give two shits about your health, but I depend on mine. I don't know where the hell I am or how I wound up here, but I want to go home, and I want to get there in perfect shape. If I find out that I have toxic metals in my bloodstream, I'm going to hold you and everyone participating in this event accountable for reckless endangerment. Now tell me where I can find a doctor now." I knew that he wouldn't have even cared if I killed him. He was a drone, probably lost his sense of danger from playing with the unidentified substance. After many failed attempts to intimidate him, I at least got him to tell me where a doctor was. In a nearby tent, there was a medical crew that seemed legit. I told them of my concerns, and they reassured me that the substance was safe to use if handled properly. I told the crew that the art show was oozing with the material. Children and parents were touching it with their bare hands. No one wore protective gear, and that no one was warned about it before entering the exhibit. I can't remember what the crew told me after I reamed them out. I can only recall that they were infuriatingly calm about the whole thing. They did offer a detoxifying injection for me, given that I was distressed about my contact with the hazardous material. I asked them if they thought I should be concerned, and the doctor said, probably not, but it wouldn't hurt to be on the safe side. The injection was administered through a large brass-colored syringe into the heel of my foot. I braced myself, but surprisingly, the shot was painless. I wondered if the antidote was just as harmful as the substance, because I had lost some feeling in my leg and felt drugged soon afterward. The effects of the drug made me too groggy to worry as much as before, but the anxiety remained and continued to fester, although dulled considerably. I became aware of every vein in my body. I could feel them all pulsating, and had the sense that something undesirable was coursing through them. I was told that I would need a follow-up shot in a year. I found myself back at the house with the dark wooden floors, only I was in a kitchen on the second floor and had no recollection of entering the house. My dad was cooking something on a small stove, and I stood about 5 feet behind him. To our right was a large refrigerator, and to the left was a staircase leading down to the first floor, where the insect-like beings had been. I asked if he knew about the creatures and of the toxic material, and he said that he hadn't. I told him about the art and science fair and what had happened, and he didn't seem concerned at all. I let him know that I was afraid and continued to ask him questions about everything that was going on outside. He then told me that he had been communicating with his late mother, and although I was, in theory, intensely curious and excited to make contact with her, I couldn't get my concerns out of my mind long enough to experience these emotions. "Don't you care?" he asked coldly with his back turned, moving a spatula around a small saucepan. "Of course," I insisted. "I'm just really terrified about the stuff I touched, and I'm concerned about the people at the fair." Dad then muttered something and wandered off, bringing a tray of food with him upstairs. I was soon met with the foreboding sense that whomever he was going to visit upstairs was not my grandmother. It occurred to me that he could have been lying or hallucinating, but something told me that some outside force was tricking him. I felt this way because he behaved mechanically as though under a spell. I stood alone in the second-floor kitchen for a short moment, feeling utterly hopeless and alienated. I couldn't seem to communicate with anyone fully no matter where I went. I felt strongly compelled to get out of the house immediately. I was almost certain the entity that Dad was about to visit was not the person he thought it was. I was more afraid that no one was there, however, than that an imposter or something horrible was waiting upstairs, because I didn't want to believe that my dad was losing his mind. I wanted to see my grandmother in her true form. I left the house as ambiguously as I had entered it, and was then wandering around a hilly field with inconsistent grass, some of which was long. I started off in a small marsh-like valley with long tufts of grass sticking out from each of its molehills. It was difficult to walk through this area of the field. Above me was a fenced-off basketball court, and I could hear the dribbling of balls and voices of male players. As I tried to climb up the main hill in order to see who these noisy players were, I was distracted by the molehills which suddenly glowed from within, catching my eye. Each little hill had a series of round glass windows behind which were glowing objects. Some resembled gelatin desserts, and others intensely detailed millefiori paperweights. They were all made from the toxic substance at the art fair. These displays were intriguing and beautiful, and I tried to closely study as many of them as I could, wishing I had created them, which ironically I had, being the dreamer of the entire landscape. Or had I? Sounds from above caused another distraction, and my attention shifted away from the hills to an area about 100 feet past the basketball court, which I never got to see. I climbed up the main hill, reached a vast and flattened area of the field with short grass, and saw from a distance what appeared to be a rugby game, played by a bunch of young, blonde-haired boys in their mid-teens. The field was so large that I wondered how I would find my way out of there once I was ready to go home, wherever home was. A long way past this game, I could see a couple hills and a stretch of highway, which was where I needed to go, apparently. I walked toward the boys, hoping to be able to walk around the game, but everywhere I turned, more players appeared, looking engaged, focused, and just ready to catch the ball. It didn't take me long to realize this was an immense game that took up the entire field, and there was no way to get to the highway without walking straight through it. My walk through this violent game was extremely unsettling, as none of the players seemed to be able to see me. I yelled at them numerous times to watch out as they stepped on my toes carelessly and shoved me unintentionally as I prodded on. The game was absolutely brutal. The boys slammed into one another, hit each other so hard with the ball that blood was drawn, etc. Despite all the yelling and violence, the players of this game retained poker faces, and when they were knocked over, they got up quickly as though they didn't feel any pain at all. One boy who had a particularly bloody face only emitted strategic code words to his team members, not the cries of someone that was injured. The game was seemingly endless. Walking through this abundance of violence felt like swimming in an ocean against the tide. I had to fight the urge to collapse so as to avoid getting trampled. Finally, I reached the small molehill beside the highway and saw a man lying on his back. I limped over to him and discovered that it was my friend Leo, who was clearly in agony. He was so thin that I could see every sinew in his body as he rocked back and forth with his head tilted, wincing in pain. His back was severely hunched and his shoulders were so far forward that he touched his ears and almost met one another in the middle of his chest. I knelt beside him, and a wave of sorrow washed over me as I struggled to look at him. "It's my shoulders," he moaned. "They're locked in place." I carefully placed my hands on each of his shoulders, one at a time, and moved them as much as they were capable, and throughout the process asking Leo frequently if what I was doing was hurting him. Thankfully, I wasn't making his condition any worse. After a long session of this improvised physical therapy, Leo cried tears of relief. To my surprise, about 5 of the boys from the violent rugby game started walking up the hill to see what was going on. As they approached, I could tell that they were genuinely concerned. Their former poker faces displayed genuine sympathy. I kept my eyes pointed toward the ground, pretending to not see the boys. Gradually, more and more of the rugby players stopped what they were doing to watch my suffering friend heal. The sensation was powerful. It was as though Leo and I had somehow fused together as a symbol of human kindness. So I have worked in this building for almost 7 years. The building is 3 stories and also has a basement and is well over 100 years old. We have had many paranormal investigators and psychics/mediums who have come to check out the property on many occasions. The one incident that has stuck with me the most happened a few years ago while I was working. The salon was in the middle of a big remodel in which we had torn down some walls to open it up a bit and gotten rid of what had been a private room used for massages. I had sat my client down in my chair in the other side of the room and then excused myself to grab some supplies from the back. On my way over, I passed this newly opened up room that was empty, except for a few storage boxes. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure. I turned to look and saw a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She was wearing a light-colored dress that was dirty looking, and she had long brown hair. She looked real, but out of place. I realized there were no children in the salon, and did a double take, and then she was gone. I was shaken up, but tried to pretend nothing happened and went back to take care of my client. After I finished the service, I went outside to smoke a cigarette, and was sitting alone wondering what the hell I had just seen, trying to make sense of the girl in my head, and one of my coworkers came walking up the sidewalk ready to start her shift. She came to talk to me, and I was visibly upset. I said, "If I tell you about something I saw that sounds crazy, will you promise not to think that I'm crazy?" Without missing a beat, she said, "You saw her, didn't you?" I said, "What?" And then she said, "The little girl in the back room with the white dress, with the dark hair, just standing there. I saw her yesterday." I hadn't mentioned anything, but she described exactly what I saw in the exact same location. I still can't make sense of it to this day. I have so many other stories I can share about my salon, different instances with the same spirit, and other ones if anyone would be interested to hear them. There's 7 years worth of weird stuff happening. OP also left a comment in addition to their post. More on the creepy side, though, is that the children come in and are really drawn to our basement. Kids that have never been inside the building before have pointed to the door and asked if they could go downstairs to play. Now, unless you know this door leads to the basement, you would never guess that's what it was. It looks like every other door in the place. Kids often mention the boy downstairs. My own son, around 4 at the time, was visiting me at work one day with my boyfriend and went into our bathroom. My boyfriend went with him, as he wasn't great at going to the bathroom by himself yet. Our bathroom has tons of pictures from magazines and posters all over the wall, and my son, from the toilet, said, "Why is that girl sad?" My boyfriend, thinking he meant the picture on the wall, shrugged it off. Then my son said, "Why is she crying?" He turns around to look where he's looking and sees a dark figure right behind him in the room, grabs him off the toilet, and then runs screaming out of the bathroom. I was outside the room and asked what had happened, and my son just continued to talk about the sad girl in the bathroom. I've heard a lot of the ghost stories that you've read, and was thinking that my mother's stories would fit in well with your channel. Honestly, I've never had much of ways in paranormal experiences, but my mother says that she's pretty much been followed by spirits her entire life. I can't personally prove that any of this has happened, so do with it what you will. When my mom was young, she, her parents, and 3 brothers all lived in a decent-sized 2-story house in the northeastern United States. The house was, supposedly, around a century old, and was actually owned by her grandparents, so my great-grandparents. Unfortunately, I don't know who owned it before that, or what all happened there before my family took over the house, so maybe there is a history that could help explain some of this. Either way, when my mom was a little girl, she would always play in her room and have conversations with someone named Emma. My grandpa actually told me about this one. He said that she was in her room playing one day and just babbling on, and then when my grandpa went to ask who she was talking to, she kept saying it was her friend Emma. Later that day, he decided he wanted to ask her who Emma was, just to kind of get a feel for the imaginary friend my mom had made up. She told him that Emma was an older girl that slept in her bed with her. This was a bit confusing to my grandpa. My mom had no sisters, and there weren't any older girls or anything that came to the house. So he prodded her for more information. She told him that Emma was a beautiful young girl that had bright blue eyes and red hair, and that she couldn't ever leave the house. When he asked her why she couldn't leave the house, she told him that she had had an accident in the house and that she had died, so she was stuck there. The whole time that my mom was telling my grandpa about her, she seemed happy to tell the story. She wasn't scared of Emma at all, so my grandpa ended up letting it go. There was another story that my grandpa would always tell me about when my mom was around 5, but this one he actually experienced personally. He said he was in the garage fixing some machine that they had on their property, and my mom was in the room with him, just messing around with his tools and doing whatever she felt like. He said that out of nowhere, my mom screams, "No, I don't like you." My grandpa said that he leaned over and asked my mom why she didn't like him. She said, "No, not you, Daddy, him," and pointed up into the storage area of the garage. My grandpa swore that when he turned to look, he saw something move. It looked like a shadow, but in the shape of a person. My grandpa was never really superstitious and was super religious, so I don't know if he believed in ghosts, and he said he wasn't sure if this was a ghost, but there was definitely something there that he could physically see. My mom also says that she constantly saw people in the corners of the house or in the basement and garage. She said that when she was older, one time she went to the laundry room of the house to wash her clothes, and when she went to leave, the door slammed shut and locked. No matter what she did, the door would not open. What's weirder is that the lock was on the inside of the laundry room because it was a repurposed restroom, so she should have been able to unlock the door without issues. She said that even though she turned the lock to undo it, the knob and door just simply would not budge. A few minutes later, my grandma went to the laundry room to get something, and it opened without issue. My mom says that during the whole time she was stuck in the room, she felt a dark and painful pressure come over her. She said that she was bawling her eyes out the entire time and smacking the door as hard as she could. Then when my grandma opened the door, the entire feeling of the room changed. My grandma was surprised to find my mom in the room and claimed that she didn't even hear her crying or smacking the door at all. She said it was completely silent on the outside. Last story for this submission, but I may have more from her in the near future. A few years after I was born, my uncle had been in a major accident at work. They called my grandpa to tell him to go to the hospital, and my mom had been at their house at the time, so she went with him. On the way to the hospital, my grandma was driving fast and acting fairly erratic on the road because he was panicking. This was definitely unsafe, especially since my mom and infant me were in the back seat. My mom says that about halfway to the hospital, my uncle randomly appeared in the passenger seat. He was staring at my grandpa and smiling with tears in his eyes, and then looked back at my mom. He told her, "Tell him to slow down. He doesn't need to hurry anymore." That was the moment that she had realized he didn't make it, and she told my grandpa to slow down. My grandpa argued a bit at first, but when she said, "Bobby said you can slow down because it won't matter," it occurred to him what she was saying. My grandpa says that he never saw anyone in the seat, but he had a feeling deep down that she was telling the truth and that my uncle had come to her to tell him to slow down and wanted to make sure they were safe before he went over to the other side. These are some of the more interesting stories I've been told. I know my mom has a lot more, and I may send more your way in the future. My mom has experienced a lot from the time she was young and has told me a lot of stories. These were just some of my favorites. So when I was in 4th grade, there was a rumor that the school that I went to was built over a graveyard. At the time, my mother and my friends' mothers both worked at the school, so we could roam the school freely after school. We decided that one day after class, we'd go to all the haunted places in the school. The places being 2 classrooms, the girls' bathroom in the cafeteria, and the playground. We didn't tell our mothers about it, we just kind of went with it. First, we went to the bathroom in the cafeteria. So me, being the only girl, I had to go in. Girls had reported hearing crying and seeing bloody handprints on the sink. As soon as I walked in, I heard the crying. It freaked me out, of course. Every time I checked the stall, I heard the crying, and nothing was there. I saw a bloody handprint, freaked out, and ran out of the bathroom. My one friend, who I'll call S, asked me what I saw, and I told them everything. They were equally just as freaked out. We really couldn't go into the 2 classrooms since the teachers in them wouldn't let us in. So we went to the playground, and behold, a swing was swinging by itself. We freaked out and ran back inside. So much for being brave. We told our moms everything about it, and they panicked with us. That's all for my story. I know it's kind of short, but it's my first post. Thanks for reading. My grandfather died many years ago now, and although he was a hard man cut from the leather of the Great Depression, he always liked having me around. He died my sophomore year. I basically shut down for a while. Weird things started to happen every now and then, but I always found some way to brush it off or just debunk it. I was finishing up my last final for me to graduate from high school when my grandma got a call on the phone from the same number under my grandfather's name. She answered it, only to static, and then a hang-up clicked. She received the call at the exact moment that I handed in my tests. I've tried for years to figure it out. If anyone has any ideas how a landline can call itself without another phone connected to that same number, please let me know. So around a year after my family moved into the house we currently live in, I started hearing tapping, which escalated into knocking at my window. The thing is, I slept on the 2nd story of the house. And after I heard knocking 3 times in a row like it was a person knocking, I'd had enough. So I moved downstairs and have been sleeping downstairs since then. And it is significantly less often that I hear creepy noises coming from the window. The only problem is that since then, my older sister, her boyfriend, and her kids who live upstairs have started hearing it too. The same knocking and tapping that was going on, except now it started happening during the day as well, plus a few incidents that everyone has heard. For example, one time we were having a family movie night, and there was a loud thud that came out of nowhere. People heard it coming from different directions. That's everything that has happened so far with whatever is going on in our house. I've lived at my address now for nearly 4 years. The thing I can remember is within, I would say, 3 months, I woke up mid-sleep and looking at the end of my bed, I seen what I could only describe as an old woman with gray, scraggy hair just hovering at the end of the bed. I fell back to sleep shortly thereafter. Another significant thing was we had a cat that had been hissing overnight, and the next day while upstairs, I hear a cat meowing in the loft. I think this is ridiculous, as there's no way the cat could possibly have gotten in the loft, as the hatch had been closed, and you need ladders to get up there anyway, but I carried on hearing it, so I grabbed the ladders and had a look. I got a very dark feeling from the loft, but looked anyway, and no sign of the cat, and the meowing had stopped. The cat turned up outside the door the next morning, proving that it definitely wasn't up there. About 2 years since moving in, we are upstairs, and I go down to get a drink, walking down the stairs and through the hall to the door to get to the kitchen. As I reach the door, I hit a wall of smell. It was a very nice smell, like expensive aftershave. It smelled nothing like anything I own. It's as if it just appeared in the hallway. I've never smelt it before or since, and all the doors were locked and no one had been in the house that day. In between all these happenings, I regularly see figures passing doorways or small cat-dog type shapes moving around corners, or doors in the corner of my eye. Lastly, something that both me and my toddler daughter both experienced. My wife had left the house, and I was sat watching TV with my daughter. After a while, we both heard the front door open and shut, to which my daughter looked at me with a smile and said, "Mommy." We both then heard footsteps up to the stairs, so we assumed my wife had gone to the bathroom. 15 to 20 minutes pass, and I start to think what she was doing, so I go upstairs, shouting at her to see if she was okay. I got no reply. I'm thinking she's having a laugh, so I knock on the bathroom door again to no answer. I open the door to an empty bathroom. At this point, I'm a bit mystified, so I try all the bedrooms, all empty, and look in the front to see no car. I message my wife, and she tells me she's on her way home and hasn't been back to the house since she left. Both me and my daughter heard the door and the footsteps go up, but not down. I just thought I would share my experiences, if anyone has experienced anything similar. My auntie and uncle were both ill. We thought my auntie would recover, but we knew the end was in sight for my uncle. He passed away at 6 a.m. in the morning, and my auntie shortly followed at 11 p.m. on that same night. They left behind 2 dogs, so me and my sister stayed over at the house to make sure the dogs were looked after until we could get everything sorted out. It was a massive shock for everyone involved. During the week or so we stayed there, a number of things happened that showed us they were in fact still in the house. I know people might think this is too soon, but trust me, somebody was still in that house. It started with me and my sister going through some of my auntie's cupboards and finding lots of things to do some baking. My granddad had said that she wouldn't want the stuff to go to waste and to use the food up and whatever else was left in the house. Although this felt very strange, he did have a point, and we were there for the week anyways. So as we were looking through the cupboard, I said to my sister, perhaps we should do some baking. As I said this, the telly turned on. What was on the telly? An advert for Macmillan Cancer Support. It was the advert that said to bake a cake for cancer support and to have a coffee and cake day to raise money. I immediately laughed and said, "Yep, looks like Sharon wants us to bake a cake." Both my auntie and uncle had cancer, so this seemed very fitting. We went and sat down in front of the TV, and were flicking through the channels, when I heard a massive bang. I stood up and go into the kitchen, and one of Sharon's cookbooks is open on the kitchen counter. It was open on a page that had a recipe to make a certain cake, so we decided that she definitely wanted us to do some baking. For the following week we stayed there, and it honestly was one of the weirdest experiences in my life. The gas fire turned itself on randomly, the dogs would bark at the dark, we heard banging upstairs. The one thing that sticks in my memory is sitting watching TV and hearing a sort of scraping or clanking sound in the cupboard. It sounded like there might have been a mouse in there. I opened the cupboard, and clear as day I could see a glass on its side rocking back and forth. I was shocked, but picked up the glass and put it right, thinking the vibration from something might have knocked it over. But then it happened again a few seconds later. It wasn't just rocking, it was going really fast and quick, like somebody was moving it. After this, not a lot really happened, but we never really slept properly there, and it was all very strange. The dogs were very aware of something in that house. They didn't seem scared, so I'd like to think it was my auntie and uncle. The dogs got rehomed to somewhere in Cornwall with one of my auntie's friends, and they lived a happy life. I often see clairvoyants, and never once have my auntie and uncle come through. I like to think they are happy and at peace together, possibly in Cornwall with their dog, eating cake and drinking tea. At the time of this story, I was a 16-year-old high school student. I got a babysitting job for a couple who had a family wedding and needed a babysitter for a super late night. I was referred to them by another family I used to sit for. Keep in mind, this was when cell phones were just coming out, so I had a super crappy flip phone with a certain amount of minutes. There were 3 kids. Oldest was a boy about 8, middle boy about 6, and a little girl who was a toddler in diapers and could not speak yet. I came in while the sun was still up to meet the kids while the parents were still there. The parents were so cool. They showed me where all the snacks were and gave me the ground rules for the night. Kids in bed by 7:30, teeth brushed, you know the drill. Once they left, we started off eating dinner. To my shock, the middle child, who we'll call Teddy, kept throwing his fork super hard at his siblings and pinching his sister with his nails into the table. He kept kicking my shins and throwing his food around the room. The moment his parents left, he became a terror. Their house was old but remodeled, so their toys were in the basement playroom. So after dinner, we all went into the basement to play. As soon as we went down the stairs, it all felt wrong. Don't get me wrong, it was a beautiful finished basement with a couch, flat screen, and toys, but something just felt creepy about it. Then the little girl kept pointing at a blank wall, one with no pictures or anything on it, and kept screaming at it at the top of her lungs and crying. It really unnerved me. At this point, I'm getting a really bad feeling, so I say, hey, let's go upstairs and watch TV till bedtime. The kids seem to love that idea, so I carry the little girl upstairs and turn on the TV for the 3 of them, and then go back down to grab her favorite stuffed dog and clean it up a bit. When I turned around to walk upstairs, I see Teddy smiling a sickening smile at the top of the steps. He has his hands on the light switch. My stomach dropped. I don't have my phone or a light, and if this little shit locks me down here, I thought. The light switch is at the top of the stairs outside the stairway, so if he closes that door, I was screwed. He flicks the light off, cackles, and goes to slam the door and lock me in the dark basement. I've never moved so fast in my existence. I flew up the stairs and shoved my hand in the door to keep him from locking me down there. I asked him why he did that and yelled at him to never do it again, and all he did was smile and then slowly walk away giggling. I iced my hand and watched him closely for the rest of the night. Bedtime comes around and I put the kids to bed upstairs without any problems. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs, parents' room at the end of the long hall, then the baby girl's room in the middle, and the boys shared a room with the bunk bed at the end of the hall by the top of the stairs. Everything finally seemed quiet, and I began to forget the horrors from earlier and began watching TV. About an hour after I put her down, the baby girl starts screaming again through the baby monitor. A scream that sounds like she's in pain. Thinking her brother Teddy is bothering her, I run up the stairs to stop him. As soon as I get to the top of the stairs, I see him lying down in his bed facing the wall. The baby is hysterical and is again pointing at nothing and crying, and I'm freaked the hell out by now. I rock the baby back to sleep, check on the boys, then return to the living room. What the hell is happening? Am I just imagining things? I shake it off and turn the TV back on, and this is when the night goes from bad to an incredibly terrible nightmare. Once back in the living room, I start to hear screaming every couple minutes. What sounds like a grown man screaming in pain. At first I thought it was outside or maybe a TV or radio, so I ignored it and kept on watching the television. Or maybe it was just my imagination, really. But soon it became clear it wasn't a joke and it wasn't my imagination. It was coming from inside the house. Then I started to hear the footsteps. I hear what sounds like little feet running upstairs in the hallway. For a second I'm not scared anymore. I'm angry that Teddy's out of bed 2+ hours after bedtime. I go to the bottom of the stairs and holler up Teddy's name and tell him to go to bed. I don't hear a response, but I hear the footsteps continue. Then I hear what I think is him running into his parents' room at the other end of the hall, feet pounding on the hallway clear as day. So I run upstairs thinking I've caught him in the act. The hall is empty and dark. I turn and I find Teddy is sitting up in his bed, staring at me again with that sickening smile. I could see his brother was asleep on the top bunk, and I could see his little sister asleep on the monitor in my hand. He gave me the creeps. I told him to lay down, and I go back downstairs to the middle floor. I then hear someone walking up from the basement, and I lost it. I slammed and locked the basement door, and I called my house number. My big brother answers him, and I tell him I'm scared. He puts me on speaker, and I explain everything to the family. I babysit every weekend, and I've never had a negative experience or called them like this, so luckily my family believed me. My grandpa, being a super religious man, prayed with me and calmed me down. My big brother got in his car to come sit with me till the parents got home, but the town I was in was a bit of a drive, so he told me he'd be there in 40 minutes. Even after we hung up, I could still hear the footsteps running around the house. Now, I'm not a religious person, but I sat on the couch and prayed and cried. I've never been so scared in my life. I was honestly terrified. The parents came home before my brother got there and saw that I had been crying. They asked what happened, and I told them everything non-supernatural that happened because I didn't want them to think I was a crazy person or tell people not to hire me. I just wasn't going to mention it at all, so I just said Teddy was a handful and that was it. As I was leaving, the dad said in a dead serious voice, "Did the ghost bother you?" I slowly turned to him, not fully believing him. I asked him if he was being serious, and he said, "No, I'm being serious. You've had a ghost problem for a while now. Did you experience anything yourself?" I broke down and started crying and gave them an honest recap of the night. I told them about the screams I heard clear as day, the footsteps and everything. How the baby was crying at the wall and how Teddy tried locking me in the basement. They believed me right away. The parents said they'd moved into the house about 2 years ago after the old man who built the house had died in it. He was an actual hoarder and fell and injured himself inside the basement and then died among his piles of stuff. And since no one could hear him scream, they didn't find him in time. By all accounts from the neighborhood, he was a mean recluse of a man. Either way, what a terrible way to go. They said they would wake up every night to things flying off their kitchen counters and doors slamming. They would hear knocks and pounding in the walls. I was shocked and I asked why they stayed in the house if they knew it was haunted. They explained they weren't able to move due to their jobs and current financial situation. And I have to admit that although it wasn't huge, it was a beautifully built home. The old construction kind of home with bookshelves built into the walls and a winding grand staircase. The dad said he would go downstairs every night for a year and say, "Go away, this is our home now, you aren't welcome here," over and over. He said eventually the activity stopped. They said it only sparked up when someone new would stay in the house or when they'd have a sitter at night. They said since I knew the truth now, that they would pay me extra to come back because they could never keep a babysitter. Yeah, right, I thought, I'm never coming back here. But I said I'd be in touch and I ran out of that house. I am ashamed to say that I never answered their calls again. I felt bad, but there was no way in hell I would ever return there. I still babysit once in a while, and I've never had an experience like that since. I still think of those kids sometimes, and I really think that Teddy was being affected by the spirit in the house. I've never encountered a child so cruel and so negative. Thinking of his little smile still sends a chill down my back. I hope they were able to move or at least clear the negative energy. Either way, it's one night that I genuinely won't ever forget. I was around 5 years old when this happened. I remember my family had just moved to live in some new apartments. We were struggling, so it was affordable for a 2-bedroom. It was both my parents and their 3 kids. It wasn't too bad, and the neighbors seemed nice enough. Anyway, so we had been living there for a few months. It wasn't too bad, but several times a week I would hear my mom complaining about not being able to find things in the kitchen. Sometimes she wouldn't be able to find a spoon or a knife that she was using. It would be moved to somewhere else in the kitchen, or it wouldn't show up for days. I never put too much thought into it. I always figured my mom was prone to losing things. I didn't realize how wrong I was until one Saturday morning. This was the mid-90s, and Saturday morning cartoons were still a thing. So my brothers and I would always wake up early and run to the living room to catch them. Of course, cereal bowls in hand and volume low so as to not wake up our parents. Every time a cartoon would go to commercial, there would be that second or two where we could see ourselves in the reflection of the TV screen, and we could see the living room and the kitchen behind us. I'll have to describe the apartment to give you a better idea of how things happened. So if you walked in the front door, the TV was to your right, and it was in front of a big window that ran almost from the door to the wall. The TV faced the living room and the kitchen. The kitchen had a bar countertop that let you look into the kitchen so you could see pretty much everything from the entrance to the fridge where the countertop ended. During one of these commercial breaks, when the screen went black, my brother said, "Hey, Mom is awake." We looked at him and asked why. He said because she was in the kitchen. None of us had heard the door open, anyone walking into the living room, or any noise from the kitchen. So we turned around, and there was no one there. We thought maybe he was messing with us, so we went back to watching whatever cartoon was on. During the next break, the screen went black, and we all saw something in the kitchen. Because we all turned around. Me being the youngest, I yelled out, "Mommy!" We all looked into the kitchen, and we saw it wasn't my mom. It was a woman in a black dress, I'm thinking maybe from the 1800s. She looked semi-transparent. She was wearing a veil that obscured her face. I was scared and really couldn't look away. She was standing there facing us and not moving. It wasn't until the cartoon came back on that the 3 of us reacted and turned around in reaction to the sound. When we turned back, she was gone. We kept asking each other if we saw that. Obviously, we all did. It's like we were trying to find out if it was just our imaginations. It wasn't until years later that we told our mom about it. It turns out that the year and a half we lived there was a lot more eventful for our parents than us. That was the only time we ever saw anything. Apparently, my dad would see a little girl in a white dress in the living room at night periodically. My mom would hear knocking on the doors when she was by herself, and would see a floating head in the bedroom at night. She also explained that the people that lived in the apartment beside ours wouldn't live there for more than a few months before moving out. Maybe they had bad things happen to them, too. I'm sorry if this story was too long, but I do appreciate you reading this. I'll try to answer any questions if you have any. Okay, first of all, I'm going to type a lot. If you don't want the entire full detailed story, just scroll to the bottom and I'll sum it up for you. Also, I have posted this here before, but something else happened last night and I'm scared and I need more answers. Recently, weird stuff has been going on in my home. I really don't know much about ghosts or anything like that, so I'm looking for some answers here. This all started a while ago. Every night I go to sleep, I always plug in my phone and lay it screen up on my nightstand. But when I woke up in the morning, my phone was upside down. I went to look at my health app on my phone, and it said that I took a couple steps between 1 and 2 in the morning, but I was asleep and there's no way I took any steps. The second thing that happened was more weird though. My sister's room is right across the hall from my room. If my door is open, I can see her room. About 4 weeks ago, I was practicing for band, my door was open, and I heard my sister's doorknob jiggle. Her door was closed, and I know for a fact that no one was in my sister's room. All the windows were closed, and no one was upstairs with me at the time. The door kept hitting the door frame because it had a bit of wiggle room, and even though it was closed. My dog came and sat on my bed next to me, but she kept looking at the door and growling and then crying at it. Also, a couple weeks ago, I was asleep and I was dreaming about a man. He was big, muscular, tall, and he looked like he was in his 20s to 30s. Him and I were standing outside my room with the door closed. We were going to see who could punch my door the hardest. The man was just about to take his turn, and right as I saw him hit the door in my dream, I woke up in real life and I heard a really loud thud on my door. This scared me a lot. I was really confused. Somehow my dream is causing things to happen in real life. I was too scared to move, so I turned on my flashlight for a second, but I saw nothing. Then about 3 to 5 minutes later, I heard another bang. The second time, the bang was a lot louder and it sounded like it broke my door. I ran downstairs and now I'm terrified to go into my room again. I really just don't know what is happening. Last night at about 12:14 a.m., I woke up to the noise of my doorknob turning. I stared at the door in confusion and fear. Once the knob turned all the way, the door opened only a tiny bit. It wasn't open enough that anyone could get in or even peek their head in, but it was still creepy. I instantly grabbed my crucifix and tried my best not to seem scared. Then this morning I asked my family members if they opened my door, and they all swore that they didn't. I'm so beyond scared to go to sleep again. Plus, above all that, sometimes I'll be sitting in my room alone, I won't move at all, and I'll hear my snow globes start playing music. They only do that when I turn them or wind them up, though. I seem to be the only one in my family, 5 people currently live in my house, who is realizing things like this, and I've tried telling them about it, but it doesn't scare them like it scares me. I really don't know if this is just normal stuff that can be easily explained, or if something is actually happening. But I haven't felt safe in my house, especially when I'm going to sleep. I really need some more answers. I'm so scared, but no one in my family believes me. I've heard that poltergeists are the only ghosts who can cause noises and move objects, and they target people, not places. That seems like my case because things like this have only been happening to me, no one else in my house. I love art, and I draw quite a lot. Recently I drew a picture of my dad's mom who passed away when I was young, which I planned to give him on my birthday. I showed the drawing to my mom, and she mentioned that her mother, my other grandmother, would also love a photo of her and her husband because Granddad also passed away quite a few years ago, and it's her favorite picture. I started on the drawing quite late last night. I use apps on my iPad to draw with as I find it quicker and easier. To do this, I usually zoom in on different parts of the picture to get the lines more precise. I was on a part of the picture that contained a car, and I moved upwards toward a tree, but I saw something strange, so I started to zoom out. When I had zoomed out enough to see what I was looking at properly, I was speechless. What I think was a cloaked figure with a grotesque face, sort of a cross between a witch and a demon, can be seen so incredibly clearly lurking underneath the tree. I can't begin to explain how clear the figure is, and I wish I could post the picture on here. If anyone would like to see the picture, please don't hesitate to message me because I need people to see this. I've never seen anything like this before in my life. I've always believed in ghosts and demons and frequently watch ghost videos, but I usually try to debunk them as I believe most aren't real. But something about this photo is very different. The fact that it was in my own hands and it had come from my family. The fact that the photo was taken around the 1970s meaning the photo could not have really been doctored in any sort of way. I know most people will think that the figure is some sort of odd problem with the picture, but just looking at the horrifying figure has immediately ruled out that for everyone that I've shown it to so far. It's so strange the terrified feeling everyone who has seen it so far has had. All my friends have said they've wanted to cry as soon as they look at this picture, although this may just be because it's sacred to them. The part that scared me the most is the way the figure is posed. It's looking directly at my grandparents with a malformed hand stretched out towards them. Another creepy part is the fact that the more me and my dad look at the photo, the more strange things we seem to find. We've also found a strange figure lurking behind the shoulder of the cloaked one. There are faces dotted around in the picture. I even think I see a shadow figure in the background too. I'm mainly posting this because I really think people deserve to see this. Not to mention the fact that I really want to know if anyone can tell me what this figure is, could possibly be, or what I should do. Like I said, please do message me if you'd like to see the photo. Sorry for the long post. About 9 years ago, when the paranormal activity in our home was at its peak, my brother enjoyed something he called ghost hunting. He would hang out in the unfinished section of the basement with both connecting doors closed and the lights off. He would bring random items and speak to whatever was back there in an attempt to experience something. I was always too nervous to join him, but one time I did. What happened that day resulted in neither of us stepping foot in there ever again, and it put an abrupt end to his game. It was in the middle of the day, and sunlight was coming in through the two tiny windows. We had positioned ourselves in the center of the room and began asking questions. I was standing in front of my brother, looking around nervously. For some reason, it got incredibly silent. I began feeling very uncomfortable, so I turned around, but realized he was not behind me anymore. Confused, I called out his name several times and started searching, but he was nowhere to be seen. I hadn't heard him leave, nor had I heard the door open or close. The light in the basement had changed. It was so strange. Every dust particle was frozen in the air like time itself had stopped. Seriously freaked out, I squatted down on the concrete floor and just rocked back and forth. It felt like I had been crouched for hours, when suddenly I felt someone touch my shoulder, and when I spun around, it was my brother. He looked very confused and asked what I was doing. I explained what happened, and he just said, "What do you mean? I've been here the whole time." Whatever we contacted that day was able to separate us somehow. It still spooks us, and I guess I'll never really know what actually happened. So I live in the suburbs of North Carolina. No deep woods except in the state parks. The neighborhood is pretty old. About half a mile from my house is a wooded area with a creek in it. It's between the back of a neighborhood and apartment buildings. Like I said before, not super deep. I used to hang out with my old friend in these woods for hours into the night. We could chop wood, build bridges, and things like that. One night we were sitting on a fallen tree by the creek. Now this part of the creek splits off into a Y shape. It had just rained during the day, so everything was pretty soaked. Now my friend and I were sitting and talking, and we hear what sounds like the raking of leaves coming from across the creek. We ignore it and keep talking, but it keeps up and seems to be getting closer. We get quiet and stare at where it seems to be coming from, and it stops. We stayed quiet some more, and then it came back, but louder and closer and faster, like something was running toward us. We booked it out of there. We came back a few days later and found weird burn marks on the trees, one in the shape of a face. Weeks later, I was walking my dog with my little brother, and we passed by these woods. The dogs start growling in the direction of the tree line, but keep walking forward. My little brother seems spooked too. After we're a safe distance from the woods, I asked my brother if he's okay, and he said, Yeah, I just saw a weird dark face smiling at me and it scared me. I wouldn't have believed him initially, but given what happened a few weeks ago, I did. A month or two later, I was hanging out with the same friend, except we were at my place. We liked to chill outside near my parents' cars, by the door to the house. We noticed a small-looking man on the road about 300 yards away. As he got closer, it got weirder. He appeared to be wearing a robe and had a light on his head. He cut through my neighbor's lawn, and we realize he's lumbering in a very weird way, and he's abnormally short. He keeps coming closer to us, so we run inside and lock and chain the door. We take turns looking out the peephole, and when I do, I see him right at the door with no light. We hear scratching at the door and then light tapping. Eventually he lumbered away the way he came. Years later, I'm with a new friend in the same woods showing them around. We approach the creek, and I tell them some things I used to do there. It's still light outside at this time, but I get an uneasy feeling and look where my old friend and I looked when we heard the noise, and I see a massive black figure, almost like a shadow, about 9 feet tall. I tell my friends we should just leave. As we're walking away, we hear a strange whistling from behind us. To this day, if I have my window open at night, I always hear strange things coming from those woods, from whistling to bangs and even light screams. My dog will bark at nothing and my cats will stare at nothing too. I've looked into ley lines, but that doesn't really explain it. But if anyone has any other ideas, it would be appreciated. Thanks. So I have a long story with a lot of moving parts, so bear with me. I think I will tell this story in the order of events as I found out about them, rather than how they chronologically occurred. To begin, I have this recurring dream that I've been having since middle school. I have it 1 or 2 times a year, but it's slowed down since I've gotten older. In the dream, I'm at home, but it isn't my house. It's a big 2 or 3 story home that's shaped like a U. I've never seen anything like it before. I go upstairs to my mom's room in this dream, and she's on the bed, seizing. My first thought is that she must be possessed. I call my brother in a panic and tell him that Mom is possessed. He just asks me if we need more bread or milk because he's grocery shopping. We fight back and forth, but he refuses to listen, and I eventually hang up and try to help my mom myself. Before I can do anything, she stops seizing and looks out the window. I run to the window that overlooks the pool in the middle of the U, and I see a spirit flying into or out of the pool. I don't hear anything, but I know his name is Chris, and then my mom is fine again. It's a weird dream to keep having, but I've never thought too much of it. Moving forward to when I was in college, there was a Ouija board that had been on the game shelf of my house for as long as I can remember. None of us had ever touched it or played it, but it's always been there. I asked if I could take it with me to college. I thought it would be fun for my friends and I to use. I've been very interested in the paranormal, but never really believed in it. I take it, and the first time I use it, I ask if it knows me. It says yes. Then I ask it how. It spells Mama. I disregard it. My friends and I use it several times after that. Nothing particularly interesting really happens in the hundreds of other uses. One night, a few years later, my family is all sitting in a hot tub late at night in late fall in our backyard. We were just looking at the stars, but my little brother suggested that we tell ghost stories. No one could come up with any, so we started talking about weird dreams and the meanings behind them instead. I offered to share mine, as I recently had one that I had had several times before. I tell this dream to my family, and my mom and dad turn their necks so quickly to look at each other I swear I heard them crack. I ask them what's wrong, and they say that Chris is just someone from their past. They act awfully strange for a bit before my mom says that she does actually have a ghost story. When my parents were teenagers and still dating, my mom bought a Ouija board, the same one that I took with me to college. She convinced my dad to use it with her, and they had fun asking it questions about their future and whatnot. They asked it several questions about their future, and specifically, if they'll ever have their own cars. It answers Grand Prix. They ask for the name of the ghost they're speaking to, and it says Christopher. They didn't really play with it again due to just lack of interest. Several months later, maybe years, after their first experience, my mom buys her first car. Lo and behold, it's a Pontiac Grand Prix. I think the fact that the Ouija board predicted that was a realization they had several months after the purchase. It could be chalked up to subconscious, but it's still a little weird. I will refer to my mom as M from here on out. Several months after the car, my parents are visiting friends in another state. They're there for a Super Bowl party, I think. They're out of snacks for the party, so my mom offers to drive to the store and get some. Now, my mom has always been a big fan of personalized license plates. So, of course, her Grand Prix had a license plate that said M's GP. She gets to the grocery store, and the bag boy helped her carry her groceries to her car. They're unloading them into the truck, and he sees her license plate. "Oh, is your name M?" "Yeah, it's my Grand Prix. Why?" "My friend and I were playing with the Ouija board the other night, and it just kept saying, 'Where's M? Where's M?'" She didn't talk any longer with the bag boy or exchange any kind of information. Now, to top things off, I'm working at my first job after college. I've been here for nearly 2 years, and only a few weeks ago did I realize the building I work in is 3 stories tall and shaped like a U. It is nearly identical to the one from my dreams, save for the fact that there's a courtyard instead of a pool in the center. I would love to hear any thoughts on this. I definitely feel like something is looking for my mom, and now going through me to find her. I don't know if it's worth noting, but my mom also seems to have a sort of sixth sense. She has dreams about people in strange rooms before they die. She's ran into someone in the grocery store and thought, he doesn't seem well, weeks before he was diagnosed with cancer, and was outwardly 100% fine and normal. And she has told me that a few times as a child she had been so angry with someone, bullying her brother, she can't stop thinking about how much she hates them, and they've died shortly after. I was laying in bed last night around 3 a.m. on a call with my friend. My room had a lot of moonlight coming in because my curtains aren't big enough to fit the windows properly, so it was light enough for me to see everything around me. I'm on the call, and I see something out of the corner of my eye. I look over and I see a man on my ceiling with his feet on my walls, a hand on the ceiling, and the other hand extending downward toward the floor. Standing at about 5'8", thin frame and just pure black. He gets down and just stands in the corner of my room. He stayed there for about an hour before leaving. Come morning, I talked to my mom about what I saw. As it turns out, around the same time last night, she was awakened by her purse flying across the bedroom, which made a very loud thump. This shouldn't have happened because her purse was pushed back on a table against the wall, and her purse is fairly heavy. I didn't have much of a reaction because I often ignore these things to avoid giving them attention. I hadn't told my mother sooner because I felt uneasy about leaving the room. Through the night, my friend is having disturbing dreams involving small children and babies. However, this time, it's left some unsolved answers. Long story short, she had a dream about being led to a field by a little girl. In the field lay a blanket with 3 doll heads around it, and underneath, a dead baby. In the dream, she described it as being very realistic and can remember even attending the funeral. Today, she was telling her mother about it over Facebook Messenger by voice recording. This is prior to telling us friends in a group chat. She screen recorded and sent us what she had told her mother so we could hear the voice note. In the voice recording, you can clearly hear the cries of a baby twice, as if it's in the same room as her. My friend does have a child, however, old enough that his cries do not sound like that, and he was also sleeping at the time. The TV was on, however, in the next room, and you can make out that this is more distant. Besides, it was Good Morning Britain that was on, so the baby crying was irrelevant. The crying sounded like it was in the same room next to her, and is very clear and easy to make out. Has anyone experienced anything like this? We are just looking for answers to why we can all hear this on the voice recording note. This all happened last Friday when I was babysitting my nephew and niece. My nephew being 9 months old, and my niece being about 3.5 years old. For some personal context, I just turned 17, and my sister is 24, her husband is 25. They were obviously young when they started, but he makes good money doing what he does, and she usually stays home with the kids. So they were able to get into a house at their current age, which to me is great. Since they just got the house recently, they had been moving nonstop for almost a month. So I agreed I would watch the kids while the two of them went out on a much-deserved date night. They obviously took me up on the offer, and there I was, watching the kids on a Friday night. The night was going well. My nephew started falling asleep on the couch while we were watching Moana, so I decided that 8 was a good time to get him to bed. He was clearly drained and ready to sleep. Thankfully, he's always been a pretty good kid, and I got him to bed and tucked in without much of a fuss. I leave the kid's bedroom, and as I'm walking down the hallway, I hear my niece, whom we'll call Shannon, talking in the living room. My niece is a sweetheart, and, in my opinion, is adorable in every sense of the word. So I decided to stop in the hallway and listen to her talk to herself. As I'm listening, she starts going on about how this is mommy and that's daddy, and then explaining that I was her aunt and that the little boy that I just took to the bedroom was her brother. She's going on and on, telling seemingly no one about her family and who we are, in a fairly nonsensical manner, which is normal for a 3-year-old. After a few minutes, I come back in the room, and she sees me. As soon as she sees me, she stops talking and stares at the floor. I laugh at her and ask her who she was talking to which she shyly replies, "No one." I get over to her, and I see that she's holding a framed picture in her hand and trying to hide it. At first I think nothing of it, maybe she just got a hold of the picture on the end table. But I know she shouldn't have it, and I guess that's probably why she's being evasive. I squat next to the chair she's in, and I ask her to give me the picture, so that she doesn't break it or possibly hurt herself. At first, she huffs and says that I'm going to get mad at her. Now, I've never gotten mad at her for pretty much anything since she's been born, so this statement was a surprise to me. I promised her that she was not in trouble, but in order to keep it that way we would need to put the picture back so that nothing happened to it. After a few moments, she gives it back to me, and I turn to the end table to put it back, only to notice that the picture on the end table is still there. I turn back and ask her where she got the picture from, and she points to a shelf that's taller than I am. Sure enough, there's a spot that's wide open where a picture frame is supposed to be. I stared at her for a moment, trying to put 2 and 2 together, and just decided to ask her how she got the picture off the shelf. After I asked this, her face got angry and she looked like she was about to cry. Like, she didn't understand how I didn't know how she got the picture. I walked over to her and knelt down again, and once again tell her she's not in trouble, but she starts pouting aggressively, and says that he gave it to her. I look around the room jokingly, and of course there's no one there, so I turn back to her and say, "The only he here, Shannon, is your brother Bryce. So, did Bryce give you the picture?" I obviously knew that wasn't possible, so I wanted to see if she would tell me the truth, or if she was going to lie to me. She shook her head no and said it wasn't Bryce, so I asked her who he was that she was talking about. To this, she just stared at me angrily, kind of like she was asking, how the hell do you not know who he is? I tell her I'm sorry that I'm upsetting her, trying to get her to calm down and just explain it to me, but that I can't see anyone in the room. Then I ask once again who he is. She continues to get pissed off at me and refuses to tell me anything about whoever this he person is. After a few moments, she tells me that she wants to go to bed. I agree, and we go up to her bedroom and get her changed and get her into bed. She hops up onto her bed, and I lean down to tell her goodnight, and she tells me to get closer. When I do get closer, she whispers in my ear, "I can't tell you his name because he told me that he would get mad. I'm sorry." I pull back and stare at her, and she is dead serious. I was freaking out in my head, so I decided to just finish tucking her in, and then went to my sister's room to watch TV. I never told my sister because I didn't know how to say, "Hey, your daughter saw an invisible man and he told her not to tell me his name or else he would get mad at her." Plus, I doubted she would believe me. For me, the fact that she got a frame from a shelf that was over 5 foot high was proof enough that something happened. Hopefully nothing like this happens the next time I watch them. To start, let me tell you who I am. My name is Sierra, and I'm currently 24 years old. My boyfriend, Daniel, passed away around 4 months ago from an incredibly aggressive brain tumor, one that basically stole his life from him very quickly. Daniel and I had been friends since we were around 14, and we decided to start dating when I was 19, so about 5 years ago. He and I were very close from day one, and we were honestly planning our future together whenever he got the diagnosis, and was basically told that he had less than a year to live. Daniel took the diagnosis pretty hard, but overall managed to maintain his optimistic personality. He spent as much time with me as he could, and those days were some of the best memories I'll always cherish in my heart. After I lost him, I was an obvious wreck. I moved out of our apartment and in with my mother, something I didn't want to do, but I couldn't afford the apartment we had on my own with my job. I shut everyone out of my life for the first month, just wanting to be left alone, and left basically to decay at my own pace in my bedroom. I hardly ate, and would just shower once a week, and my only time out of my room was when I went to work. It was about 2 months ago that I started having these vivid dreams about Daniel. I remember a lot of them, honestly, because they mean so much to me. The first one I had was of me and him at a doctor's office. I remember the doctor telling me that I was pregnant and that it was going to be a boy, which doesn't make sense. If I just found out I was pregnant, they really wouldn't know the gender like that. I remember the look on Daniel's face after I was told I was pregnant. He had the look of pure joy and went in to hug me tightly. I could tell that he was crying on my shoulder, which really just melted my heart. Then I had the dream that he and I were getting married. It may sound stupid, but it wasn't a massive wedding in the dream. It was a courthouse wedding. I remember that there were around 5 people we knew in the courthouse with us, and I was so elated to be marrying the man I loved. There were a few more that I could cover, but honestly, typing this out kind of makes me want to cry. I would dream about him every night, and it was starting to affect my mental state. I was starting to think that maybe I could take my own life and be with him again, and that's what he was trying to show me. The last night I dreamt of him, I literally asked him before I went to bed. I sat up and said, "Daniel, is there any way for me to be with you? I just need you to tell me if I can be with you." After I asked, I just sat there in silence on my bed with my back against the wall, and eventually I dozed off. That night was the last dream I had about Daniel, and it was by far the strangest and the saddest. The dream took place at his funeral, but he was in the casket and also sitting next to me. I was the only person there at the church, and I was dressed in casual clothing, basically jeans and a t-shirt. I remember that I was just sitting there and sobbing in the dream, crying my eyes out with his arms wrapped around me, and just wishing I could be with him again. He gave me a tight hug and told me that he was sorry our time was so short. In the dream, I asked him again if I could just end it and be with him once more, but he told me that wasn't even an option. I asked him why not, and he told me that I still had too much left to accomplish in my life. He explained that he was sending me the dreams from the other side, and that he wanted me to see what we could have had. He said he didn't intend to hurt me, he thought it would make me happy to know what could have been, but he realized that it did hurt me. I told him that they made me happier than I had ever been, but it also hurt deeply because it couldn't happen anymore, to which he responded that it could happen, just not with him. I was so confused by this statement. I didn't want it to happen with anyone but him. Finally, he stood up and told me that he had to go, and that he couldn't send me any more dreams. I stood up and tried to run over to him, but my legs wouldn't move. No matter how much I struggled, they just stuck in place like I was cemented to the floor. He turned back and looked at me with his bright smile, and he told me he loved me, but I had to keep going for his sake. I then watched as he closed the casket and faded away. I remember waking up from this dream drenched in sweat and tears, and feeling like I was going to get physically ill. Unfortunately, that night was the last night I had any of these dreams. I still do have some dreams of him, but none that feel as real as those did. I firmly believe that Daniel was trying to show me the life we could have had he not passed away, and he honestly had the best intentions on doing so. He wanted me to know that he was going to be okay, and that honestly he was hurt just as bad by losing our future. I haven't moved on or started seeing anyone new yet, it's only been 4 months, but I know someday I'm going to have to, because that's what he would have wanted more than anything. Honestly, there's not a day that goes by that I don't miss him, and I wish he was here. But I'm also glad that I got to actually say goodbye one last time, even if it was just in my sleep. This isn't so much one encounter, but it was a terrifying experience. I've never told this story to anyone besides the police, but I've been thinking a lot about it lately, and only recently realized how much the whole thing really messed me up, so here goes. I met this guy at a bar one night. We had a great time, partied all night, and eventually ended up back at my apartment. After that night, he basically lived with me instead of the hostel he was staying at. We clicked right away, and I enjoyed having him there. We dated for about 3 months before the first night he attacked me. It was the night of my 30th birthday. We celebrated, had a blast, and passed out around 3 a.m. He had told me he suffered from PTSD and night terrors. He had woken up many nights freaking out. I was deeply passed out when I awoke to 5 quick blows to the head and face. I tried to cover myself, not knowing at all what the hell was happening, when I realized my arms were pinned at my sides. He was sitting on my chest with his legs on my arms and strangling me before I had any idea where I even was. I only remember the light fading and going black as he squeezed harder on my neck. When he let go, the blood eventually rushed back to my brain, and I remember seeing him walk to the bathroom. At that point, I grabbed my dogs and ran to my car and took off. He must have passed back out. He called me hours later, completely confused as to where I went. I told him everything he had done, and he promised me that he didn't mean to do any of it. He would never do that on purpose, and he promised to seek help. I agreed to come back on the terms, if he even scared me again, that he'd be gone. Exactly 1 week later, again in my sleep, I woke up to him on top of me, but not doing anything. I slowly pushed him off and pretended to be getting ready for work. Out of nowhere, he jumped up and sucker punched me in the mouth. I fell onto the bed and he again tried to strangle me. This time I didn't fight and I pretended to just pass out. He let me go once he thought I was passed out and went to the kitchen. As soon as he left, I grabbed my dogs again and booked it to the car. I jumped in the car and locked it. This time he chased me, and that was when I realized this wasn't some PTSD nightmare sleepwalking freakout. He was a psychopath. He was awake and very coherent. He was screaming that he'd burn my house down if I didn't come out, trying to break the windows to get into my car. As soon as I got the doors locked, I called the cops. He went back inside, and when the cops arrived, I told him he's crazy and that he might try to attack them. When they went in, he was quietly waiting for them and went without any resistance. He knew what he did. It wasn't until during the trial that I found out there was a knife in my bed. When he let go of me and went to the kitchen, thinking I had passed out, he went to get a butcher's knife and had left it on the bed when he chased me out. No one can prove what he was planning, but I'm convinced he was about to stab me to death. He wasn't charged with anything in the end, because the DA pulled some fancy lawyering maneuver and tricked him into walking right into the arms of ICE as soon as he left the courthouse. I have to say that was satisfying to watch. He was deported and banned from the country. He still tries to contact me on social media by making new accounts to try to get me to help with his appeal to be allowed back, but nope. He still claims he wasn't awake for any of this. I don't know what I believe, but I know I feel a hell of a lot safer with him on the other side of the globe. I've been having a hard time sleeping since then. I kinda brushed everything off and carried on with my life as if none of this ever happened. Thinking about it recently, I realized being attacked in your sleep and coming that close to possibly being a murder victim might cause some lasting psychological damage. I am considering seeking help. I think maybe sharing the story for once might be a healthy first step. Okay, so last year I was coming home late, 11:30 or so, to my roommate's home. Just me and my roommate lived there. I'm the only one home at the time. I go to the kitchen to make dinner and get halfway up the stairs, and then I hear pounding on the door. I never answer the door because I never invite people over, so I ignored it. I turn the hallway light off, and the pounding gets worse. I know you're in there, don't effing ignore me. I quickly close my bedroom door, the only safe place for me in this small house. I somehow move my heavy furniture in front of my bedroom door, big chest of drawers, and I just crammed it against the door. And I grab a hammer, like this would help me. The pounding gets louder and louder, as if this person is throwing their whole body against a very, very solid door. I call my mom, who then tells me to call the cops. The noise has stopped right when I call the cops. I tell them someone is trying to break in as the noise starts up again. The screaming and yelling, throwing body against the door. Slightly nervous that this stranger may try the sliding glass door, which I know my roommate never locks. Thank God it was locked this time. I stay on the phone with the dispatcher as the guy keeps yelling his head off. I can see his car still from my window. I saw you turn out the lights. I know you're in there. Let me in there. I'm sorry. Let me the F in, you meh. Well, by the time the cops come, the man has already left. I somehow get downstairs to talk to the cops. They find the guy parked down the street from my house. They ask if I know him. I don't, but my roommate does. It's her daughter's boyfriend. He came to apologize for smashing and breaking her hand in a car door. Well, they don't arrest him because he didn't technically do anything. I ended up filing a restraining order against the guy. Told my roommate when they got home. They thanked me, but called me sensitive when I told them I freaked out. Her daughter said, he's harmless. Yeah, right. I moved out the next day. Long story short, my roommate's daughter's boyfriend wanted to apologize by breaking in. Mind you, this is not about my ex, but my cousin's, which makes it even more creepy. My cousin was with this guy for a really long time, so everyone in the family thought they will surely, eventually get married. But after I would say around 10 years of dating, they broke up. Like you may think, everyone was shocked, but at the same time, somehow for me, they've never looked good together. He was always mean, angry, and frustrated with everything, and for some reason, he always made me feel uneasy. The actual story happened when I was 14 to 15, so it's been quite some time now. It was summer, and all of my cousins left on a road trip, and my aunt and uncle went to visit some family members, so they asked me to keep an eye on the house and take care of their dog while they were absent. During the day, my grandma stayed with me, but For the night, she went to her house, which was only around the corner. That night, I was laying in bed watching some movies. It was already getting late, so around midnight I turned off the TV and went to sleep. It wasn't even 15 minutes when I heard a noise outside. My aunt used to put the pots with the food on the patio since it was cooler there during the night, so the sound reminded me of putting the cover on a pot. Normally I would ignore that, but I thought the dog is probably wandering around outside and trying to eat up the food. So I rushed out of the bed and straight to the kitchen back door. I turned on the light outside and looked out the window, expecting to see a dog. For my surprise, there was no dog, but immediately I noticed the shape of a person. Quickly turned off the light and noticed the dog sitting behind the kitchen table. I felt my heart racing. There was no one there with me to ask for help. So without moving, I waited. Suddenly the person appeared right in front of the door, and I recognized him as my cousin's ex-boyfriend. What the heck, I thought? I knew he used to come here even without notice, but during the night that was kinda strange. "What are you doing here?" I asked, but he just said to unlock the door for him. "No one's home. Everybody left. Olga's not here either," I answered, but he didn't look like he was going to walk away. "Can you at least let me pet Roxy, the dog?" he asked. The dog belonged to him and my cousin, so I thought maybe he missed her. I opened the door then, just a tiny bit for him to be able to reach his hand inside to touch the dog, who was now standing between me and him. Suddenly he grabbed the door and pulled, saying angrily, "You can at least open the door so I can come inside." So now we were standing there, me in my pajamas, watching him playing with the dog who was apparently happy to see him. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he said with the same voice, and I noticed he was drunk. I was nervously, constantly checking the time. "It's getting late. I think you should go now," I said, before I even realized that he was in front of me. Just to let you guys know, I'm a pretty small person, barely 5'2", and this guy, at least 6'2", was hanging on me and pushing me against the wall. "You're drunk," I said, pushing him away. He looked at me with eyes full of tears. "Why did she break up with me when I loved her so much?" he said. "I don't know. That was her decision and I had nothing to do with it." "Can you at least hug me?" he asked. So just to get this over with, I let him put his arms around me. My heart was pounding, but I tried to keep it together. "I think that's enough. It's really late and you should go now." He looked at me surprised and tried to hug me again, but this time I was constantly pushing him away. Finally, we reached the door. I opened it and gently pushed him out. "Why are you pushing me?" he said. "Are you afraid of me? I won't do anything. Come on, just let me stay." "You can come back tomorrow, or when Olga comes back. And if you leave now, I won't tell her that you've been here tonight." I answered in the same moment as I pushed him out as fast as I could and locked the door behind him. Because he was drunk, his movements were a little slow, so that gave me a little bit of time. "Go home," I screamed and turned off the lights. Even from the other room, I could hear his inappropriate screams. And then my heart dropped. Did I even close the front door? I rushed, and at the same time, he grabbed the handle. But fortunately, the door was locked. "Open the door! Open it, you bitch!" he screamed. "Go home! Just leave!" I said. Went back to the room and covered my head with the pillow. But even then, I could still hear him screaming through the door. He walked around the house a couple more times, checking both doors, and finally, after what felt like an eternity, he left. I knew I was done sleeping for the night. After that happened, I didn't tell anyone about it for actually quite a long time. And after that, I saw him at the house a few more times, but it was always awkwardly strange, and since then I tried to not even look in his direction. I will definitely remember that as one of the scariest nights of my life. I was told this story would be a good fit here. When I was about 8 years old, my sister, who was 18 at the time, brought home her new boyfriend. He was around 30 years old, which concerned my mother, but it wasn't abnormal for my sister to do this. At this point in her life, she was falling rapidly into a deep depression. Drugs and one-night stands were very common at this time of her life. so an actual boyfriend seemed better than my mom not knowing where she was every night. The boyfriend was very nice to us, and especially to me. He and my sister took me to different places. He bought quite expensive gifts for me, and my 8-year-old self liked him very much for this, of course. This will be relevant later. I even went to his house for a sleepover, but of course my sister was there with me. I should tell you that I never got any creepy vibes from him ever. He never said anything weird or creepy as far as I can remember. Fast forward to the day they broke up. It's quite a blur, so I don't remember all of it, but I do remember him showing up at our house and my sister refusing to let him in. My mom wasn't home, but it was still light out, and luckily we're very close with our neighbors. My other sister, who was around 13 or 14, kind of locked herself in her room, but every now and then she'd walk up to our older sister and ask, "Has he left yet?" Now, I was a very curious kid, and I had no clue to what was going on. I saw my older sister was very distraught and very snappy toward me. Understandable, considering I was constantly following her and asking her questions. I remember looking out my mom's window while my sister tried to push my head out of sight. This is also relevant. Boyfriend yelled at her that he had to come all this way. He lived about an hour away, and something about the police, though I can't remember what. He left shortly thereafter. Years later, I thought of this evening and finally asked my mom about it. What she told me left me shocked. Apparently, my sister had found adult content on his phone. It still gives me shivers thinking about how nice he was to me, and why my sister tried to keep me out of view that night. This isn't as scary as most stories here, but I thought I would share it and let you guys decide. But sister's ex-boyfriend, I really hope me and my family never see you again. This all started when my mom met her new boyfriend, who I'll call Ray. This was when I was 14. The first time he met me and my siblings, he looked at my mother and said, "Oh wow, I didn't know you had a gang." So, great first impression, right? He seemed like a normal guy at first, but after he moved in, we soon realized he was a hothead. He would yell a lot and throw tantrums, but he would always sweet-talk his way around my mom and make everything seem okay again. And this is probably why she didn't dump him sooner. My mom has always been a bit immature, so I think it made it easier for him. But Ray found it really difficult to get along with me and my siblings. He would complain about every little thing we did wrong, and he started to accuse us of trying to ruin their relationship because of this. I have 3 sisters, and me and my younger sister were the wild ones of the family, and we were the ones that he had a problem with. He soon stopped us from seeing friends that he didn't like, and was more strict with us than with my other sisters. I realized he was crazy when he picked me up from school one day, which he never did, and while driving home, he accused me and my sister of talking about him behind his back. I said, "What?" And he started going on about me not bothering to deny it because he's got proof. When I got home, he showed me a recorder and played back me and my sister complaining about him in our bedroom. So I knew that it was in our bedroom. What the hell? Immediately, I asked him, "Why are you recording us in our bedroom?" We had a big argument, and I immediately rang my mom and told her, but I think she didn't want to get on his bad side because she didn't say anything about it to him, which still annoys me. I made him remove all of the recorders from mine and my sister's room. When I was 16, I got a job at a chicken treat, and he had a big problem with that as well. The reason for this was because my boyfriend at the time worked there, and he thought I was just going there to mess around. So his way of making sure I didn't was to come and record me, and he did this for a month. I was pretty much done at this point. I moved in with my dad, who had just moved back from NZ. My dad was pissed when I told him all this, and he wanted to call the police on him, but my mom begged him not to do it. They broke up soon after over something completely unrelated, and thankfully, I never saw him again.